this disconnect between what we're hearing from the scientists and what the President of the United States is saying.
Now leave it to the Democrats to try to turn a virus into a political attack.
President Trump today denying an obvious shift in tone from previous statements.
I am officially declaring a national emergency. Two very big words.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Among the media stories that we're covering this week, Donald Trump, disinformation, and the coronavirus. The White House and its sidekicks at Fox News have been producing fake news of the most dangerous kind.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry about.
I was about to say the same thing.
China throws out more American journalists as the media battle between Beijing and Washington heats up. An uprising in Lebanon where protesters want to bring down the political establishment, and that includes the news media. And the biggest captive audience ever. So many people in lockdown, producing so many quality memes. With the coronavirus grinding life to a halt around the world, millions holed up at home, people are desperately searching for reliable information. But what if two primary sources of news, the government and the most watched television news channel, are setting aside medical science in favor of politically driven fiction? That's what Americans are dealing with. For 3 years now, President Trump has had the fact-checkers working overtime. But the stream of disinformation on COVID-19 flowing from the White House has not only misled the public on the severity of the threat, it has put lives at risk. Then there's Fox News, the channel politically aligned with Donald Trump. Its initial attempt to frame the pandemic as a hoax designed to take down the president has also been exposed. As infection rates climb and the death toll mounts, Trump finds himself confronted with some facts, scientific ones, that not even he can deny. You'll notice a slightly different look to the following piece, Skype interviews, lockdown style. It's part of the story. Our starting point this week is Washington.
Here to discuss it is Fox News medical contributor Dr. Nicole Sapphire.
A prediction about the coverage of the coronavirus and misinformation made about 3 weeks ago on America's most watched news channel.
The economic and emotional toll by misinformation is going to hit us much harder than this virus is in itself.
Of all the networks to sound the alarm about COVID-19 and misinformation, that soundbite was on Fox News.
It definitely is quite ironic. Fox News has been a steady source of misinformation about the coronavirus, peddling the idea that it's no big deal.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry about.
I was about to say the same thing.
So the irony is not lost that Fox is calling against misinformation while spreading it.
It would be difficult to understate the Fox News factor in America's misinformation problem. Fox has taken a similar approach to the way it covered other White House scandals, like Russiagate and the subsequent impeachment hearings, downplaying the seriousness.
The whole Ukraine impeachment saga is boring, hard to understand, and apparently goes on for eternity.
Attacking Trump's critics as politically driven.
Over this sham show.
And applied it to a public health emergency.
You're having so many people listen to one massive news source for information, it's going to have an effect that sort of ripples through people that aren't connected to Fox News because they're in proximity to the people who are still going about their daily lives, as if this is not happening, because they've been told by a number of hosts on Fox News that it's for weeks that it's not as serious as it actually is.
The Fox effect can be measured. A poll conducted by the Pew Research Center found that Fox News viewers are almost 5 times as likely as MSNBC viewers to believe that the media have greatly exaggerated the threat of the coronavirus. Given that Fox's audience is the oldest of the major networks, and therefore the most vulnerable, the channel's coverage is truly dangerous. Fox has moved on from initially playing the story down, succumbing, as the president has, to reality.
The coronavirus, every virus, as we have been telling you, you must take it seriously.
But it took far too long. The network hitched its wagon to Donald Trump long ago, and its coverage has mirrored the president's shifting position on the coronavirus story. Mediaite.com monitors broadcast news coverage in the U.S. It bolted together a chronology of Donald Trump's sound bites on COVID-19 over a 6-week period. As the number of cases in the U.S. climbed alarmingly, Trump's message changed drastically.
How concerned are you?
Well, we pretty much shut it down.
You know, a lot of people think that goes away in April. Within a couple of days, it's going to be down to close to zero. There's a chance that it won't spread.
It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle.
Almost everybody that we see is getting better. And it could be everybody, too. They're going to have vaccines, I think, relatively soon.
What do you say to Americans who are concerned that you're not taking this seriously enough and that some of your statements don't match what your health experts are saying?
That's CNN, fake news. It's really working out, and a lot of good things are going to happen. No, I don't take responsibility at all, but it's something that we have tremendous control of.
And on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your response to this crisis?
I'd rate it a 10.
Just a few days ago, he really started using words like pandemic. He said it's really bad. He acknowledged it's out of control. But something or someone began making him speak about it differently. There have been reports that one of the Fox personalities, Tucker Carlson, who he's close to, did start taking it seriously.
We haven't faced a medical crisis like this in living memory.
And was talking to the president about how he needed to change his demeanor on it, his message on it.
Trump and his allies try and manipulate the rhetoric and shift blame, but they cannot manipulate the virus with the misinformation. And we do have a free press here in the United States that will continue to report out statistics of confirmed cases and death rates. And even though we'll be getting that information, Trump and right-wing media will definitely continue to shift the blame.
It's particularly dangerous to lie in a crisis like this, to get a people to do what they don't want to do, to get collective action out of a group of people that have different ideas of what should happen. You need a strong central authority whom people trust that has their best interest in mind. By lying, you of course remove that element of trust.
The Trump administration had a trust issue with the government's own scientists, although that too is changing. In the early stages, the White House was doing most of the briefings and dispatched its economic officials to calm the markets. But the actual medical experts at the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, were initially sidelined. Anthony Fauci, who heads the National Institute of Infectious Disease, is doing more public speaking now. But as recently as March 1st, when he had 5 different interviews set for the Sunday morning talk shows, the White House told him to stand down in favor of officials like Vice President Mike Pence.
I'm very confident we're ready.
The administration has been silencing scientific voices since the very start of its administration, particularly in regards to climate change and environmental protections. They've been dismantling these scientific agencies. Particularly in this case, Trump had dismantled the office that would have been working on pandemic response.
To be fair, the CDC and a number of other executive branch agencies have a fairly long history of increasingly being reluctant to discuss things with the public or the press directly. This was true during the Obama administration as well. Journalists could no longer speak to officials from the CDC. Of course, in the Trump administration, this has gotten exponentially worse, but it would be unfair to say that this was a Trump innovation.
We've seen sort of a whole litany of myths and just lies really from the administration that go into the face of science. And when it comes to climate change, of course, that's a huge issue. That's sort of a long-term, bigger picture thing. But right now, the administration's anti-science talking points on COVID-19, we're going to be feeling that immediately because people are going to get sick if they are listening to the administration.
In being elected to office and managing to stay there, Donald Trump has proven that facts don't matter the way they used to, that lies just don't stick to presidents the way they once did. But the coronavirus story is different. It's about medical science first, politics second. The facts are right there in the numbers, the body counts, and they are incontestable. Could it be that Donald Trump's fake news narrative has finally been exposed, met its match, in something he has never had much time for? Science.
Every one of these doctors said, how do you know so much about this? Maybe I have a natural ability. Maybe I should have done that instead of running for president.
Well, it would be nice to think that it's met its match once external reality hits it. However, I'm much more skeptical. The broader breakdown is that people are accepting that criticism, even good faith criticism, is a sign of enmity. that you cannot take criticism without assuming that the critic is your opponent politically. So in an ideal situation, yes, one would say that, look, this is reality, we have to reject the lies. But it is not a preordained outcome that, in fact, the lies may defeat the truth, even when the truth is obvious.
This is a virus. It's not a political movement, and it doesn't have an ideology, and it doesn't care about your ideology. It just has a way of attacking our bodies. So lack of clarity, the attempts to not really grapple with the threat that the whole world is facing cost us time, and maybe it cost lives.
We're discussing other media stories that are on our radar with one of our producers, Meenakshi Rafi. Meena, news broke this week that the Chinese government is expelling at least 13 American journalists from the country. Let's start with who is getting deported.
Richard, these are journalists who have covered China for years. People like Amy Chin and Paul Mazur of the New York Times. The other newspapers whose journalists are being expelled are the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. Now, China's foreign ministry announced on Tuesday that these journalists would have to turn in their press cards and have to leave in 10 days. Other media organizations, such as Time Magazine and Voice of America, which is a US government-funded outlet, have been allowed to remain, but must adhere to strict rules. They have to provide in writing key information about their staff, finances, operations, and real estate in China. Now, there's been plenty of tension between Washington and Beijing over the COVID-19 pandemic and its origins. Trump, for instance, has labeled it the Chinese virus. But this battle over media outlets goes further than that. This is just the latest in a long-running tit-for-tat between the two countries involving one another's journalists. China's latest move is a direct response to the Trump administration's decision last month to classify 5 Chinese state media organizations operating in the US as foreign missions.
There's also a big story coming out of Pakistan, the arrest of a media baron there. Now, the Pakistani media are often at odds with the authorities. The country never does well in those global press rankings, but still, this arrest represents a significant development.
It does, especially for those who hope that the election of Imran Khan in 2018 as Prime Minister would mean an improvement for Pakistani journalists. Now, the media owner arrested is Mir Shakilur Rahman. He's the CEO and editor-in-chief of the Jung Group. Now, the Jung Group is Pakistan's largest private media organization. It owns numerous newspapers and TV stations, including Geo News, one of the most popular Urdu-language TV stations in the world. Now, Rahman was arrested last week on charges relating to land he bought 34 years ago. It's an ongoing case. He's been attending all the hearings. So this arrest prompted protests from Pakistani journalists who see it as nothing more than an attack on press freedom. Now, we've reported before on how Geo News has been a frequent target of the authorities for its critical coverage not just of the government, but also the military. Geo News has repeatedly been taken off the air, sometimes mid-broadcast, and some of their top journalists have accused the authorities of being behind attacks against them, sometimes even on their lives.
Okay, thanks, Meena. We're turning to Lebanon now, which has declared a coronavirus state of emergency. This is in a country that's already 5 months into a series of anti-government demonstrations, the biggest since Lebanon won its independence back in 1943. The protest movement bridges classes and sects. Citizens are revolting against a political system that is defined by sectarian identity and has failed to provide them with the economic basics. It's an ongoing story that has also revealed much about the failure of Lebanon's media outlets, too many of which are skewing their coverage since they are split along the same lines that politicians are. We're looking at one news site that's out to change the media mix and mess with mainstream news narratives. Megaphone is an online platform that produces punchy social videos and boundary-pushing opinion pieces, critical takes on the news and the way it's been covered. The Listening Post's Tarek Nafa now from Beirut on a news outlet that's tapping into voices left out by the mainstream.
We're in downtown Beirut, which for the past 5 months has been the epicenter of an uprising that has shaken Lebanon to its political core. People here have had enough of a dysfunctional power-sharing system, a broken economy, and an inept, self-serving elite. They have a mantra, which is kullun yani kullun. All of them means all of them, which means doing away with the entire old guard, which includes establishment media.
الإعلام هو سلطة رابعة وهو كتير مهم، يعني هو جزء من الثورة، بس آخر فترة الإعلام اللبناني قصر شوي بحقنا.
ولكن ما بعد الثورة اكتشفنا إنه في مبادرات مستقلة مثل ميجافون.
They were non-existent and then suddenly they were the go-to news outlet.
ميجافون فرجتك اليوم على الطريق، يعني سمعتنا صوت الناس الحقيقيين.
فعلا كان هو الميديا بلاتفورم الوحيدة اللي عم بتغطي الثورة day by day.
They opened also a space for many of the thinkers and the opinion leaders in Lebanon.
ميجافون هو كان يعني صورة الثورة بشكل ممتاز.
Megaphone is not the only media outlet chronicling Lebanon's uprising, but it is the most dynamic. Before the protest started in October 2019, the collective was producing around 2 videos a month. The uprising demanded more. Megaphone's mostly volunteer journalists, many of whom work a day job, were pulling all-nighters to keep up with the rhythm of the street. They were soon publishing as many as 2 or 3 videos a day, including an unedited snapshot from the street and street talk, which amplifies voices of the uprising. The content is sharp, slickly produced, and has occasionally put Megaphone's videographers in the crosshairs of the authorities.
It is often barbaric. We have people on our team who were physically attacked just because they were carrying a camera. But I don't believe these methods will silence anyone. Our primary aim is to target a specific age group who no longer get their news from television or newspapers because they are disgusted by the rhetoric and also because the format is simply not appealing.
The streets surprised us, and we were shocked at how politicized people became and how much they wanted to consume political content. And this forced us to address issues more responsibly and with output that is more critical than before.
So we are trying to produce something that empowers people who were previously disconnected from politics to follow and understand news developments and of course to react and eventually hold politicians accountable.
One of Megaphone's most successful formats came from a frustration of politicians getting too much airtime and too little pushback. Speech deconstruction skewers politicians with their own words. Exposing, for example, the ways in which they have tried to plant fear about the protests.
Television gave these people the freedom to give speeches for as long as they want, without giving anyone the opportunity to respond. It was a popular format because it hasn't truly been done before in other media. There is no need for the audience to watch a politician's 2-hour address. They were able to understand the bottom line and at the same time deconstruct and challenge arguments being made by politicians.
Critical journalism can be hard to come by in a country where politics, business, and media are overwhelmingly a family affair. Just 12 families, most of which are directly involved in politics, control close to 50% of the media. The remaining 50% are run by political parties or the state. In Lebanon, media is politics by other means, but one channel has taken more flack for its coverage than any other. OTV is the mouthpiece of President Michel Aoun and his party, the Free Patriotic Movement. The channel routinely depicts protesters as hooligans prone to violence.
حتى مثل ما عم نشوف بالصورة ريتا كمان الأشجار تم اقتلاعها ورميها باتجاه القوى الأمنية اللي هي.
They also peddle a conspiracy that the opposition is part of a foreign-funded plot.
Look,
I am not claiming that OTV does not have a point of view regarding the so-called revolution. Actually, no media is neutral. I don't think there is no media out
Jad Abu Jodi is OTV's head of news.
OTV represents a certain political view, which is known from its name and from its political belonging. However, it has been fair in its coverage, but you cannot control completely any guest that appears on air, either on the ground or in our studios. And maybe sometimes some of our guests have said things which we do not adopt, but people in the street link them directly to OTV as a TV station.
Yeah, OTV has definitely received the most heat in terms of their media coverage. And the extent of the inflammatory rhetoric from OTV is a bit, it's a bit over the top, which has really riled people up. Of course, at one point, because of how much heat they had to come in with unbranded microphones. And also, they have, of course, played a very important role in helping the political leaders and the elite kind of reshape themselves in light of these protests.
Not all Lebanese media outlets have taken such an aggressive position against the uprising. LBC, Al Jadid and MTV gorged on the protests when they began in October last year. Their coverage was wall-to-wall, and a significant portion of it was sympathetic, with correspondents around the country playing the role of interviewer cum therapist, handing an open mic to protesters to let rip.
That sort of coverage was never going to last. Lebanon's elite, made up of powerful businessmen and former warlords, most of whom own the country's biggest media outlets, is adept at survival. And so channels like LBC and Al Jadid have moderated their tone and some would say gone back to doing what media in Lebanon do best, serving as platforms for politicians.
All these outlets are run by businessmen or politicians or people with political ambitions of sorts. So there is a certain threshold that they have in order to maintain their legitimacy officially in Lebanon among the elite. However, the way that they have given the space for major politicians and bankers and so on is beyond the right of reply.
At the beginning of the revolution or the uprising, the majority of the TV stations in Lebanon, they were one-sided. They were only covering the point of view of the people who are with the revolution and who are cursing, let's say, all the political spectrum in Lebanon. Media has to reflect the change, not make the change. Media has to cover the change. It does not have to make the change, or it will become a politically motivated media, which is far from being fair and from being professional.
That argument might be more convincing if Lebanese media weren't so resistant to change, so utterly compromised, unable to detach themselves from their ownership, unwilling to act as a check on Lebanon's elite. Lebanon's media are, like its politics, broken. A reckoning was overdue.
It is very difficult for one to think about political change without a fundamental change to people's source of information. When journalism confronts and challenges the various official narratives put forward by the sects, or the parties or the factions, then we can actually change the rules of the game in this country. So it is not a detail. The media is a fundamental pillar in this process, whose role is to deconstruct a regime that has lasted too long and cost the country too much.
The big challenge going forward is that because people have lost faith in traditional media, is how for us journalists who are trying to create alternatives that are based on accurate reporting, investigative work, inclusive narratives, is how to win that trust back. Because now what we're seeing is that people are relying on memes, things shared on WhatsApp, and lots of rumors, and they don't want to look into traditional media anymore. As long as the media landscape remains the way it is, we cannot expect any significant change in Lebanon.
Finally, imagine if this coronavirus story took place 30 years ago. You'd have hundreds of millions of people around the world stuck in their homes with no internet to connect each other, just phone calls, letters even. The World Wide Web has made this social distancing thing a lot more social. Videos have been showing up in all of our feeds of the many creative ways that people are keeping themselves entertained while in isolation. Boil them down, and the basic message is you can quarantine us, you can put us in lockdown, but the memes will keep on coming. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Che la domenica, coronavirus o non coronavirus, si mangia tutto assieme. Buona domenica! Domenica! Buon appetito!
Ching ching, ching ching, thank you, ching ching guys, ching ching.